So let's see. The chair is Mr. Smith, and we have Mr. Volkmer chairing the committee for Mr. Smith today. So Kent Volkmer,
Present on Zoom.
Brian Wright,
Here.
Brad Conley,
Here.
Leslie Lemens. I think that's all who we're missing. And Director Silbert, DPS.
Walter Mercer for Director Silbert.
All right. That is everyone.
Okay. We'll move on to agenda item number 2, and that's the ATA Legislative Subcommittee discussions, and specifically the fiscal year 24, which it's hard for me to even say, budget projections.
There's Leslie. Hi, Leslie. Or Leslie's phoned in, so sorry, Kent, go ahead.
Not at all. Director, do you want to lead this, or Frank? I'm not sure who's in the best position to kind of, I guess, set the stage for us.
Yeah, I'll take it, Mr. Chairman. And members of the board, thank you, members of the subcommittee, thank you for being here today. And sorry for kind of, in a sense, we had to kind of schedule this, right on the front end of the board meeting, but this is just kind of how it worked out by the time we got everything completed. So just as kind of setting the stage, at the November meeting, ATA staff was asked about some strategies to spend down the fund balance that is accumulating. And so we looked at all the categories within that where we spend money. And just kind of as a reminder, this is not something that's unusual for ATA staff. We generally do this every year when we do budget requests. We look at what the absolute needs are, what are the nice to haves, and we submit that once as a standalone agency to OSPB, and now we submit that through DIFI to be part of the DIFI plan to OSPB. When I first came in several years ago, we were asking for across the board increases in a lot of different categories, and getting no attention to that. We decided that maybe the better strategy was to scale back and to ask for just exactly what the most critical needs were, which were personnel and vehicles. Generally is where we concentrated vehicles for the task force, and personnel for the task force were deemed to be the most critical needs. Last year for the FY23, we had written a document and we're kind of prepared to submit it through DIFI. But what happened was when we were working with the task force, we received some numbers from them, and by the time we kind of assessed everything, we really had no confidence that we could answer some of the questions that we knew we were going to need to answer, and we didn't feel comfortable sending Director Daniels into OSPB with likely questions coming to him that we could not answer at ATA. So at that point, in discussion with Frank, we decided not to submit last year just because for those reasons. So this year, we've kind of done the same exercise, and I wrote a memo to Chief Solberg, which is part of the board attachments, and should have been part of the meeting attachments here, I think, and included that. But what I've done is I've created a slide deck to just really, get to the heart of each one of these, because it's a lot of numbers, it's a lot of narrative, and I don't know how else to present it, but hopefully the way I've chosen to present it, I can work through it pretty quickly, breaking it down by category, explaining, some of the things are absolute, some of them are absolutely subjective on our part, and I can go through that. The one thing that I would tell you is that, things will change between now and the next time we have an opportunity to submit this to OSPB. For one, we'll have to make those recommendations to Director Daniels and see how that plays into DIFI's recommendations. But we'll have another budget, here in a couple months, hopefully, probably 5 or 6 months. And that's going to potentially change the outlook of what we're presenting. But this today is really what I consider our best estimation for how things exist today. But again, we know it's going to change. So with that, Amanda, if I can have you present the slide deck. Okay, and just so we'll go on to the first slide. So in trying to kind of figure out how best to present this, this is kind of what made sense to me. If it doesn't make sense to you, then because it allows me to kind of work my way through it, hopefully quickly and not get too mired down in the details. But so for the Vehicle Theft Task Force, for the current DPS salary and ERE, we'll cover outside agency down in a lower box. But for DPS salary and ERE, as it exists today, it's that first box, upper left, $2.5 million is what we pay. So for the fiscal year 23, the one coming up in July, there's going to be new ERE rates for DPS. And it's really good news because there's been a large influx of money that's gone into PSPRS from the state. And that's going to reduce a very high ERE rate that DPS pays now by about 40%. So what we're expecting now is that the salary remains the same, and this is the box just to the immediate right at $1.2 million, but the ERE goes down from 1.3 down to 885,000 is what our projection is going to be. That equates to a savings of $436,000. So what we did kind of in preparation, we went to the task force and we asked them, what would you like to see? How does the task force need to grow? Or, keeping in mind that there's going to be staffing shortages and it's not just a free-for-all, that we needed kind of a conservative effort or estimation ask from them. And they came back and they told us that they would like to have 2 additional detectives, 1 analyst, which we're really in favor of at ATA because of the pending database. And then they would like to fund the second half of an intelligence research specialist. There's already half of that funding now on their books. And then additionally, the outside agency, they project that that's going to go from $915,000 to $960,000, which means that there's a $45,000 increase expected because it's a 5% generally each year for outside agencies. So all that being said, the request is for staffing increases comes to $474,000. As I mentioned earlier, there's a savings of $436,000, which leaves a deficit of $37,000, almost $38,000. So that's really not too bad when it comes to staffing. And if there's ever any questions, I see Mr. Volkmer, you have a question, so feel free to ask away.
I do. So like I'm sure many on the call, I had the honor of listening to Governor Ducey's State of the State speech. In one of his expressed objectives, it was to significantly increase pay rates for DPS. DPS is, especially compared to the larger municipalities, are not being paid on par with, I think, their counterparts. And if the governor were to follow through, even if he didn't bring it up to the level that he described, but he were to bring it up reasonably, that's going to be a lot. Like I could see that being north of 10 or 12%. I noticed we don't even have like a COLA adjustment in the salary or any increase. Does it make sense for us to build in some sort of at least cost of living adjustment and or potential raise, or should we just keep it at this and kind of make DPS eat the difference?
That raise is mentioned in the governor's budget, but it's also mentioned in our appropriation. They have accommodated that raise by giving us that additional money. I think there's an additional $109,000 in our appropriation. Now, I couldn't really put that in here because it doesn't exist today. So again, that's one of those things that is likely going to change. But this is the first year that OSPB has recognized that raise needs to run parallel with anything that happens at ATA. So they have accounted for that.
Okay. I just saw the top two, that number didn't change, but that's because it was already embedded. So I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I mean, we could have done it that way with speculating what the budget might look like in FY23. Just, I don't know if that's a good form or not, or just to kind of rely on what we know is occurring.
I'm just of the mindset, if we're going to ask for what we really need. Because if it becomes a bartering session or a negotiation, we can always come down. But if we come in and this is sort of our bottom line, it gives us no negotiating leverage. Let's say that the director comes in and says, hey, is there any way you guys can shave stuff off? It puts us in a tough spot. I'm not asking to build fluff or anything like that, but I think we ask for ideal and come down, but that's just the way that I've always kind of handled budgets, and just make sure that we can justify the ask that we make.
Well, to the director's credit, after the State of the State address, when the governor talked about the raises for DPS, he sent an email immediately to our OSPB analyst, and she responded back and basically saying, "Yeah, we got this." And then when we see the budget come out, they did have that. So I think we're in good shape. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so for task force vehicles, from what the information they gave me from the task force, there's about 35 vehicles in the fleet. We're making an assumption that DPS vehicle will last for 6 years of a service life. Their DPS does not have a set schedule that they retire a vehicle. Basically, if they can get 180,000 miles out of one, they will. But we know that certain vehicles may go that long, but other vehicles will not. So we think that a 6-year service life is a good assumption. And if you just do the quick math, 35 vehicles and 6-year rotation, we should be doing about 6 vehicles a year to keep that fleet healthy and changing out on a normal schedule. But because we did 14 vehicles last year, I think we can get away with doing a lesser number of vehicles per year. So again, this is just a subjective kind of estimate on our part that we could do 5 replacements per year. And you go to the box immediately to the right, this kind of breaks down what a vehicle cost. The average price of 14 vehicles last year that were purchased was just under $40,000 a piece. Each of those vehicles required emergency equipment, and and the labor to install, that's $15,000 per vehicle. The radio and antenna is $8,500. So a total average cost of one vehicle comes in just slightly over $63,000. So the projected salary savings, and this is where the ATA staff salary is actually apportioned, and DIFI pays for part of our salaries because we all have roles within the bigger organization outside of the auto theft side of things. So we end up saving some money because we have that money coming in, we're appropriated for it, but we're not spending it all. So last year, we saved about $335,000. We expect that we're going to save that again this year. And we generally send all of that money over to DPS in the form of interagency service agreements. So in this case, salary savings of $335,000, vehicles cost $316,000. That keeps us basically in the black at $18,000, slightly over $18,000. I don't really consider that there's much of a savings here or an excess because cars are going to go up, labor is going to go up. I think that's just part of the inflation that we're seeing. So that $18,000 will probably get eaten up pretty quickly. But the good news is there's a funding source for vehicles, and it should be cost neutral for us in this regard as far as asking for more. All right, next slide. Now, for vertical prosecution, what we did is we went to each of these county agencies and we said, what would it cost to make you whole? Because we've long suspected that what we are awarding in grants does not cover the full cost of prosecutors and the administrative staff that are on the grants. So all of the agencies came back and gave us their actual true number of what it would cost to fund their prosecutor, and if they actually have admin staff on the grant as well. The one probably biggest increase is from Pinal County, because Pinal County said, hey, we think we can justify an additional prosecutor. They wrote a fairly lengthy justification memorandum, which detailed why they think that. So we added it in there as well. So it took them, it took all of the county requests would be 1.367. And historically, the vertical prosecution grants have been awarded at 930,942. And did a little research. It looks like that number has been in place with the board granting that number for the last 5 years. So this is going to be a big increase. The requested increase at 1.3, the previous award, if it were to stay the same, leaves a deficit of 436,271. So I'll just keep going with each of these, and then we'll, if there's any questions, please just let me know. So next slide, Amanda. So law enforcement grants, these are the grant dollars of what's left over after we spend the money on the vehicle theft task force and the vertical prosecution grants once they're awarded. And it's generally a small amount of money. You have to keep in mind that we have a limit on the amount of grants that we can give out. So there is an appropriation, and the grant appropriation for fiscal year 23, $5.3 million. With the task force grant and vertical prosecutions staying the same, that leaves 26,758. Last year we issued 3 different grants in the amount of 25,980. So there's not a lot of money to go around. That generally covers public outreach, law enforcement like equipment, and training is what we have to take out of that. So it's a very small amount of money. This is, again, just a subjective decision that we made internally at ATA. We'd like to see that increased by $50,000. We think that we could actually fund some innovative programs around the state. I think the enthusiasm for these grants has not been there just because there's no money to speak of. So we actually have to kind of go out and solicit, hey, why don't you put in for a grant? And we might have $5,000 or $10,000, and so few agencies do that. We think if that were increased, we could actually build a little bit more enthusiasm for that. Again, very, very subjective number though, but we think we could spend it. Next slide. The database project, we funded some of this already, one-time funding. This is the part where we get to the fact that it's going to be an ongoing expenditure. So the database subscription is $120,000. It is subject to annual escalation for a 5-year run that they quoted us. It increased by about 12.5% over that time frame. So since I didn't include that because we do budgeting, 1 year at a time. So the first year is $120,000. Database enhancements at $20,000. This is optional. We don't have to expend this money. They put that in there because they have seen historically, the vendor, that agencies will come back and say, hey, we would like to see, this particular report. Can you do the programming to give us a management report that tells us this? And so they kind of load that on the front end just to say you might want to consider adding this into your budgeting process because agencies have found it beneficial to have certain reports created by the vendor. So that's what that $20,000 is. And then the DPS system maintenance, this is paid to Computer Products of Illinois, CPI, which is the DPS vendor. They're the one who takes care of DPS's interface with ACIC and such. There's a $10,460 charge for the database for them to do whatever magic and that they do to keep that thing running the way it's supposed to. That's also subject to a 5% escalation each year. Doesn't mean that it's going to go up. They just kind of build that into the contract saying it could go up. So if you add all of those up, it's $150,460 for the database. And of course, we would love to have that funded in particular with a solid appropriation, so we don't have that, on one year, off the next, or scrambling to try and fund it. Next slide. So here's the summary. This is just all the stuff that I covered, what the requested increase is, 1.381 million. The deficit ends up being 674,000, which really, when we're taking in over $1 million more than we're spending, may not be a huge ask. It's certainly well within what the revenue stream allows. So anyway, that's I guess that would be what our recommendation would be if we were going to put this forward to the director. Next slide. And are there any questions? Okay, Amanda, next slide. So this is the last slide. So I guess really what we would need, Mr. Volkmer, is some whatever discussion or some direction on where we would go from here. This is the product that we've created. If the subcommittee were to endorse it, then I would present this tomorrow in front of the full board. Certainly have the ability to reject everything that we've done, and or to also amend anything that you think needs to be amended. And then after, I guess the way that I foresee this happening is if it does get presented to the full board, then it would be voted on to be presented in a similar way to the DIFI director. And it would probably become part of his plan going forward. And it really is a good idea that this is occurring now, because it gives him a lot of time to consider this and to figure out how it's going to work in with the larger agencies ask for FY24.
So Jamie, what I'd like to do is open it up to all the members that are here. I'm going to declare, just so everybody knows this, they might have seen Ann and I were messaging back and forth. I'm one of the largest individual beneficiaries. My office is, I'm the Pinal County attorney, and we would be adding a full attorney. So for me to say, yes, this is great is, I don't know, ham-fisted is the right term, but I mean, clearly I benefit from it. However, to me, it makes perfect sense. I don't have any concern spending that extra $657,000. It's been 5 years. There's been no adjustments. Costs have gone up. Things have gone up. The need has increased. I would just make sure that the director, if he's going to go to bat for us, has the information that you presented maybe a year ago, Jamie. And that was, you kind of showed where we were at pre-AATA, and then as far as the national rankings, how many actual stolen cars were being taken here, where we were ranked at, and then where we've progressed, and how this has really benefited the citizens. Because to me, that was really powerful. Because otherwise, if you don't know, if you're not involved in this world, look, as a prosecutor, had I not been involved with ATA directly, I wouldn't have known as much work as we actually do, and how much good that this organization does. So I think those statistical numbers sort of validate our existence, for a lack of a better term. So I would love to see him have that information. But what I'd really like to hear is from the other, because we can't vote because it's not set as an action item, but we certainly can give direction. My direction would, I think this is great. I'd love to see this presented before the board, but I'd like to hear from everybody else, and maybe somebody else has a different perspective or additional changes they'd like to see made.
Walter Mercer from DPS. I support Mr. McGuffin fully. One, the numbers stand on their own, so I support them completely.
Maybe we get some input from the insurance folks. Brad or Brian, does this seem like a beneficial use of insurance assessment funding?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's better to be used than just kind of sitting there.
I think the budget's outlined pretty clearly. I think Mr. McGuffin has done a good job of clearly appropriating where exactly everything is going to go and what the benefit's going to be. I agree with Mr. Volkmar as far as that additional attorney being in their county. I think that'll definitely benefit their prosecution and will ultimately benefit Maricopa County overall as well, because they're kind of stuck in between us and Tucson.
Anyone else have any input before we move on?
Well, do you feel you have adequate direction for tomorrow's meeting?
Absolutely. I guess my plan would be, I guess I'll apologize in advance to those on the call that are going to have to sit through the presentation again. But yeah, if that's what the direction is, that it gets presented to the full board, then that's part of the plan, and the agenda. So the agenda tomorrow will accommodate that. I anticipated that's where we would go from here. So.
Okay. With that, I will move on to agenda item number 3, which is a call to the public. If anybody wishes to address the authority or let us know, speak up now. I hear nothing. I guess even though it's not agendized, I'll throw it out there. Is there anything that anybody wants to add before we formally adjourn? Okay. Well, I certainly appreciate everybody working with us, and I apologize to everybody and them making themselves available. I know Ann was busting her hump trying to figure out a time that Robert or I could be available, and we had some really goofy schedules. So I know this was very late in the game. That's 100% on myself. So we appreciate everybody making themselves available, and we'll see everyone tomorrow.
Perfect.
And
Thanks,
with that,
Kent.
we don't need a vote. I can just formally adjourn, correct?
Adjourn. We should probably have a vote. We're trying
we
to get
vote
into the
to vote?
habit of it.
Yeah, it's different organizations do it different. All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
Walter Mercer, I motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we have a first and a
Leslie?
second. All those in favor? Was that Leslie that seconded?
Yep.
Okay. All those in favor, if you could indicate by voting aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Hearing none, I will formally declare this meeting adjourned. Again, thank you, everybody, and stay safe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kent.